Welcome, one and all. Holy Apple, holy time, holy land here. Today's class, put on a few seat belts here because we're going for a lot of curves here. Be prepared. Few exclamation marks. June 23rd, 2019. Be prepared. Exclamation point. June 23rd, 2019. In small letters. The 20th day of Sivan. Okay. I hope this title caught your attention because it should. And what we're about to learn is very, very important lesson in history. Because those that do not learn from history, they're destined to repeat history. Okay. The year was the 26th of May, 1171. Year 1171. This is France. In the town, in the city of Blois. In the city of Blois. The entire Jewish community of Blois in France was destroyed on the 20th, in the Jewish calendar, on the 20th day of the Jewish month of Sivan. Now the Jews were offered to convert to Christianity, but of course nobody agreed. And in fact, it was reported by a few people that survived, that were able to sneak out, that the Jewish community of Blois in France, they went to their death singing Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, which would become for entire Jewish history, would become sort of the national anthem when Jews chose death over life, when Jews chose Judaism over Christianity. They went to their death singing Aleinu l'shabeach, when we thank God that He has not made us one of the nations, when we are privileged, even though we are marching to our death, we are privileged to be a part of the Jewish people. We would rather march to our death as a Jew than to live free as a nation of the world, as a regular member of the world society. The great Torah commentator, Rashi, the greatest of all, his grandson, his name was Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam declared, after this event in Blois, where an entire Jewish community was destroyed, murdered, synagogues destroyed, books, Torah scrolls, he declared a national fast for the Jewish people on the 20th day of the month of Sivan. A few days after the declaration, this national declaration, that this day, the 20th day of Sivan, should become a national fast day for the Jewish people for all time. 2 days later, after this declaration, Rabbi Tam, his real name was Yaakov, passed away from such depression, from such seeing what had happened to this beautiful Jewish community in France. The years passed, and as the rabbi would say, the Jewish memory barely remembers what happened an hour or two ago. To remember what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, after some years, this national fast was forgotten. Unfortunately, with tears in our eyes, this fast was not forgotten at all. Fast forward your cameras. Approximately 500 years later, in the year 1648, Jewish year 5608, on the 20th day of Sivan, the leader, the rebellious leader of the Cossacks and the Ukraine people, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, may his memory be erased, began pogroms. You know, it's amazing. I looked in a dictionary at the word pogrom. It said, amazingly, that the word pogrom was kind of invented when Jewish communities were destroyed and Jews were murdered in mass. So it's an amazing concept. No, the concept of pogrom is a tailor-made concept for the Jewish people. Like we say a sacrifice, in Hebrew, seir la'azazel. Yeah, the Jews were always the sacrifice. This is pretty amazing here. So pogrom is really an expression expressing the Jewish people being annihilated in cities or communities or in states. So the pogrom began on a Wednesday, the 20th day of Sivan, 1648 was the opening round of the pogrom that would last for solidly for another year and would go on and off for about 3 years. Now let me tell you something amazing about this year. 1648, Jewish calendar 5608. There are numerous amount of sources that teach us that the year 5608, excuse me, it's not 5608, it's the year 1648, 1649. Now, this year was supposed to be, the Hebrew date, was supposed to be a time of redemption for the Jewish people. $5408 was the Jewish year. Listen to this amazing stuff. Hold on. Put on a seatbelt here. The Zohar Kadosh, the Holy Zohar writes in Book of Genesis, page 139, side B. Listen closely. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Arach, he looked very sad and frightened. Rabbi Yoshua came up to him and said, "What's wrong, Rabbi? You look so down and depressed." Rabbi Elazar replied, "I see that what our sages commented in the oral law, what they proclaimed, that the redemption will come to the Jewish people and the redemption will come to the world in the beginning of the Jewish year 5000 is not correct. It's correct on one hand, but incorrect. What did he say? I understood that the redemption of the world and the Jewish people would come in the Jewish year, beginning of 5,000, which is 780 years ago. But now I now see that it will come only hundreds of years later, in the year 5408, Gentile year 1648. The redemption of the Jewish people. Did you hear this? Redemption of the Jewish people. And he goes on. And Rabbi Elazar goes on and says, we see two hints to this in the Torah. Number one, Abraham goes to buy a burial plot for his wife Sarah. And who does he speak to in order to get permission to bury his wife? The children of a community called Chet. Now, if you take those two letters, Chet, and turn them around, it comes to the numerical value of 408, which is, of course, the year 5408, 1648. And the Zohar says, we don't just leave it at that. Why did Abraham spend so much money to buy a burial plot for his wife Sarah? In order to show for generations that we believe in the resurrection of the dead. And therefore we're willing to spend. You know how much people spend? People all over the world that want to be buried in Israel. You know how much some of them spend to be buried in Israel? $20,000 to be buried in Israel. Why are they throwing their money away? Just throw the person in the garbage can. Put them in a dumpster. Why do I have to spend $20,000 to have someone buried in Israel? Or buried at all? One of my dear relatives, he decided that he wanted to be cremated. And I spoke to a friend of his, and I pleaded, and I wrote letters, and I pleaded to him on the phone, don't do this. Don't do this. And I explained to him why. And in the end, this very, very close relative of mine, I'm not going to give details, he was cremated. Why not? So Abraham comes and he's putting down a lot of bucks. He's putting down a lot of shkalim to bury his wife Sarah. Why? To show us that is important. It's very, very important, a person's burial place, because this is where the person will be resurrected from the dead. They will leave. This is where they're coming out. So it's important to put money into this. So the transaction went through the people of a community called Chet, which represents numerical value of 408, the year of redemption. But one more clue, one more secret of the Torah that Rabbi Elazar is giving us. It says that if a person sold his house or his property or his land, his fields, to others, that property will return in the end of sometimes 7 years, sometimes 49 years, the 50th year, the Jubilee year. And it uses the word Zot. And if you do that after the year of Zot, which is 408, take the letters Zayin, Aleph, Tav, you get the numerical value of 408. When the year 5408 comes, the Jewish people will return to their inheritance, i.e. the land of Israel. So we have two clues, one with Abraham dealing with the 408, the community that their name equals 408, and we have here another Torah commandment that we will return to our property or our freedom or our land after the Zot, 408. But that's just the tip of the iceberg here. Listen to this. The holy Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, otherwise otherwise known by his acronym, the Ramak. The Ramak said the following, that even though there have been various dates that our sages claimed were times for redemption and they have passed, we cannot go any further past the year 1648 in Hebrew, in Torah terms, in the year 5408. It will not go past that. Whoa. The son of the Shlach HaKadosh, the holy Shlach, his name was Rabbi Shaftil Horowitz, says the following: the Jewish people will be freed when it comes the year 5408. The Jewish people will be freed. We have a lot of big hitters going on here. We have the Zohar, the mystical writing, we have the Ramak, and now we have the son of the Shlach HaKadosh. But it's not over, folks. One of the leading spiritual leaders of a community in the Ukraine that was destroyed, murdered, butchered, was a community in the Ukraine called Nemirov. Now in Nemirov, one of the leading rabbis, his name was Rabbi Yechiel Michal. Eventually, he was murdered in the pogroms of 1648, 1649. But listen to what he said before this, before he was murdered. He said, if you look at Chmielnicky's name, his acronym, it stands for the following. Right, his last name was Chmiel, which is Chet Mem Yud Lamed. The acronym is Chevlei Mashiach Yavi. One second here. Chevlei Mashiach Yavo Lachem. He saw this saintly rabbi, Rav Yechiel Michal. He saw that the catalyst to bring the redemption was going to be, may his name be renounced, Bogdan Chmielnicki. He saw it in the first letters, the four first letters of the name. Listen to this. If you open up the scrolls of Esther, there are two big letters there. The first letter is a big chet. It appears in chapter 1, verse 6. It says on the word chor, there's a big chet. Chor is a type of material. And if one more place that there's a big letter, that is at the end of the scrolls. That's chapter 9, verse 29. There's a big letter Tav. It says that Esther wrote the scrolls. And if you look at the Tav is big. So we have two letters that are big. Tav and a Chet. That's 408. Okay? Tach, the year 5408. An amazing thing. If you're still sitting down, more power to you. King David said in Psalms 132:14, Zot menuchati adeyad. This is going to be rest. This is going to be our final battle. This is going to be from now on. It's downhill from here. It's all rest from here. And he uses the expression Zot, Zot has the numerical value of 408. Once again, the year 1648. The year 5408. So King David saw in his prophecy, he saw something about this year. Listen closely. It is written, the Arizal and the Chida say something very frightening. And never forget this lesson. There are times in history where our sages spoke the truth. They saw correctly. They saw opportunities to bring on the final redemption. They were not lying. They were not delusioned. They spoke the truth. But if the Jewish people didn't step up to the plate during these momentous historical times, then these great times of redemption, of coming back to the land of Israel, being independent again, these great times turned out to be the worst of times. And this is not just the Arizal, this is not just the Chida. It's enough if they just said that. But this is written in dozens and dozens and dozens of books over the ages. Another way of looking at this. There was the rabbi of Vienna, chief of the Jewish courts of Vienna. He asked the question, after the pogroms of 1648 and 1649, we'll get to the amount of Jews that were murdered. The numbers go from 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 Jews were murdered during this 3-year period of 1648 to 1651. How could it be, he says? The Zohar wrote, black and white it seems, that in the year 5408, we saw all these sources. How could it have been wrong? And the chief rabbi of the Jewish court of Vienna, shortly after this destruction, said an amazing thing. The Zohar, you didn't understand what the Zohar was saying. The Zohar is the secrets of the Torah. It's the hidden of the Torah. You didn't catch what he was saying. He was saying that the redemption will come in the year 408. He wasn't talking about a year. He was talking about the numerical value of 408. Now listen closely. When you come to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, and you open up your prayer books, and you will see, we say there are 3 things that annul a decree against the Jewish people, against the world. If one repents, that can annul a decree. If one gives charity, and if one prays. Those are 3 things. Now, if you have a good prayer book, it will say below that, underneath the column of repenting, it will say, tzom, fasting. Underneath the column of charity, it will say mammon, money. Underneath the column of prayer will come the word voice. Folks, put on that seatbelt. Because if you do the numerical value of all those three, Kol, 136, Mammon, 136, and we had Kol, Mammon, and Som, fasting, 136. 136 times 3, 408. So Rabbi Fibish, the head of the court in Vienna, that's what the Zohar was saying. When the Jewish people get their act together, when they put these three ingredients together, prayer, repentance, and fasting, then the redemption will come. He wasn't speaking about a specific year. Okay, let's go a little bit of history. What was going on? What's happening? Short but to the point. We're in the year now 1600 in the Gentile calendar. The Jews already had been in the area of Poland for over 250, 300 years. They were extremely stable in the area, if not wealthy. Okay, now we're getting all of this from a tremendous historian, Rabbi Beryl Wine of Rehavia area. He has a tremendous website of history. You should go into it. It's like called Crash Course on Jewish History. So, got to give him the credit here. So, the Jews already are in the area of Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania for 250, 300 years already. And they're well-to-do, many of them. They're wealthy and they're very stable economically. The Jews were appointed by the Poles to be the landlords in the area of the Ukraine over the peasants. They had the dirty work. The Jews were given the dirty work to go every so often and collect the taxes and collect the rent money from the landlords, which were in Poland. So the dirty work was done by the Jews. So you can imagine that the peasants and the local people, local folk, they didn't exactly love the Jews. Jews were just doing a job. This feudalistic system set up by the Poles exploited the peasants. Even by working the land, they would never be able to even pay rent. Forget about paying for the land, to own the land, yeah? But even paying rent, it was set up in such a system, they had no choice. They had no chance, excuse me. In 1637, a large uprising by the Cossacks and the local peasants against the Jews who were doing the dirty work of the Poles. 2,000, between the years 1637 and 1640, more than 2,000 Jews were killed. This is pre-Bogdan Khmelnytsky time. This is just the locals here getting on the Jews. 2,000 Jews in a period of 3 years. In 1640, the Poles reasserted their power over the Cossacks and the Ukrainians. And it seemed on the surface like the situation had calmed down. Yuck, yuck, yuck. 1648, a new leader, charismatic leader arises out of the Cossacks. His name was Bogdan Khmelnytsky. or Chmenilki. He was a follower of, religion-wise, he was a follower of the Russian Orthodox Church. They hated the Poles, who were mostly Roman Catholics. This is like a religious war going on over here. April 1648. April 1648, he crosses Chmenilki, however you want to call him. In April 1648, he crosses, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Dnieper River. It's a small little river in Ukraine. He crosses over it and proclaims an independent Ukrainian state. 1648, April. In spring 1649, Bogdan Chmenilki breaches a truce and invades Lithuania. You signed on the dotted line, doesn't matter. For Mr. Bogdan, we don't recognize these truces, these treaties of ours. And he goes and invades Lithuania this time. This was a place, Lithuania was a place that many Jews had fled because of what was happening in Ukraine. So they're running to find refuge in Lithuania, and a few months later, who's on their tail? None other than Chmenilki. Though the Lithuanians were themselves persecuted by the Cossacks, they turned against the Jews. Remember all these lessons about our supporters and our friends. Remember all these Jewish lessons, because the Torah cries out, it is law that Esau hates Jacob. It is law. In 1651, 2 years later, the Poles defeated the Cossacks. The Poles went on to slaughter the Jews, accusing them somehow, get a load of this one, the Jews that paid the price for the Poles, the Jews that were massacred because of doing the dirty work of the Poles. Now the Poles, liberated, took over the Cossacks and the Ukraine, and they accused the Jews of being traitors, of siding with Chmenilki, who killed 100 to 300,000 of them. Try to figure that one out. Sleep on that one. Call me in the morning. In 1652, the Tartars changed alliances, leaving the Poles and joining the Cossacks. This restarted the revolution one more time. Imagine that. You think it's over. It started in 1648, and in 1652, now once again we have friends of the Poles who are doing what they did to the Jews. They are traitors to the Poles, and they change alliances, joining the Cossacks. To complicate the situation, a plague breaks out in Russia and Poland. So you have now the Tartars are on the side now of the Cossacks, and they start the revolution one more time. Let's give it one more shot. And now you have a plague that's going on. That's how, in this period of time, 200,000 of their people were killed out easily. 200, 300 of their people were killed out in this plague or inside fighting. In 1653, right? So it went from 1648 to 1653, was finished. In 1653, Russian and the Polish kings joined forces, putting down the rebellion, and they killed. Listen how to quiet down rebellion. Take notes over here, please. How did they quell that rebellion? Listen to this. They publicly killed 10 to 12,000 Cossack soldiers in the city square. That kind of quieted the revolution there. Also, Bogdan Chmenilki was also himself executed in the square there. But don't worry, till today, he's still a hero. In Kiev, if you're ever traveling Kiev, Mike, you ever been to Kiev?
No.
Good. Because there is a statue of none other than Bogdan Khmelnytsky, right there in the square, Kiev. Okay, if you're ever visiting there. Not only that, if you ever go to the Ukraine, okay, if you ever go to the Ukraine, where's my map? Yes. I have a map for you. I have a map of the Ukraine. You could go and visit the town called Khmelnytsky. Yeah. 300 years, right? The revolution was 1648. So about 300 years later, in the 1900s, they renamed this community, this town or this city, Khmelnytsky. You can see it on the map right here. It's right over here. If you could see it, it's right there. And believe it or not, in 1919, within a few hours, 1,500 Jews were murdered in Khmelnytsky. Within 3 hours, 1,500 Jews were murdered. In 1919, there was a famous case. Maybe you know this, Mike. There was this guy named Schwarzerd. He got word that 15 members of his family were killed in this Khmelnytsky village, and he went and he staked out, he followed the mayor of the town, he followed him around till he found a place, and he murdered him. He killed him. He was put on trial. His self-defense was that he had to avenge his 15 family members being blown away. He was, within 15 minutes in court, he was let out. Folks, if you could still, can you imagine that? You know, I personally sat 3.5 years in prison for taking vengeance for the Jewish people, all the terror that the Arabs were doing, 3.5 years. And here, this guy Schwarzern, he goes to trial, he's arrested, he doesn't try to get out of it, he doesn't say I didn't do it, he says I killed the mayor, but I had to avenge the murder of 15 of my family members, and he was the head of the city, so he is responsible. Now this is very interesting because the truth of the matter is that the mayor himself condemned the actions against the Jews. Very interesting. But the court said he was doing this great commandment of vengeance. We're going to acquit him. It's pretty amazing. Okay, folks, let's keep on rolling here. Let's see. I'm giving to, I hope you haven't eaten yet, but I have a list here. This is from a book, an eyewitness that was present at the time. It's called, in Hebrew, Yeven Mitzula. It's in English, Days of Abyss, I think it's called. This is on the 4th chapter. Listen to what they did. Don't forget, this is before there are guns. They killed these Jews in the most brutal fashion possible. This is pre-guns. We're talking about 1648 here. Okay, so let's go. Let's see what happened. Starting on the 20th day of Sivan, which is coming up in 11 days. Many of the people, the population, the Cossacks, the Ukrainians, they removed the skin from their bodies and they gave the meat, the remaining meat of the Jews, they gave them to dogs in the streets. Many people had their hands and feet cut off. Sorry to have to read this, but it's an important date coming up. It's a fast day, and it's important that we wake up. It's important that we never forget who we have to thank, who's responsible for us being here today. These people that gave their lives throughout the generations, these millions or billions of Jews that gave up their lives and kept the Torah and refused to convert to Christianity, we owe them everything. We owe them at least a day's fast coming up on June 23rd, 20th of Sivan. The hands and the feet that were cut off, they were thrown under wagons and carriages and put under the feet of horses. Many of them were injured terribly, but they were not allowed to die. They had to suffer till the last second. Many people were thrown into a pit, and they had a mass grave, buried alive underneath. Babies were killed while hanging and cleaving to their mothers. Children were chopped up like fish. Pregnant women, they chopped open their stomachs, took the baby out, and put cats and closed the stomachs back up. They then cut off the mother's hands so she could not reach in and take the cats out of the stomach. Children were hung by their mother's nipples. Many children were chopped up and put on a barbecue. And they brought the meat, the barbecued meat, they brought it to the mothers to dine on. Many times they took children and buried them and made them into bridges. This might remind you of Egypt, the children that were thrown into buildings. There was no cruel death that the Ukrainians and the Cossacks skipped over. Many women were taken into captivity. Many children. Many women were raped in front of their husbands. Jews were taken as slaves, as concubines for the local population. But folks, not only do we have to thank these proud Jews, 100, 200, 300,000, whatever the number is, we have to thank them. Because of these types of people, we're still around. The Torah is still around. We're still kicking. The only reason we're victorious here in the land of Israel, the only reason we're a dynasty, we're a power here, is all these bridges, all these children that were buried alive, these bridges that we crossed over on their shoulders, on their backs, that river of blood that we crossed over. That's the only reason. It's not the IDF, It's not BB. It's not high tech. It's not low tech. It's all jive. It's all jive. It's the sacrifice, self-sacrifice. Jews that refused to bow down to idols, to Christianity, to Islam. Think about today, the assimilation. Without any threat, people throwing away Judaism like it's a piece of garbage into the trash bin. When their relatives gave their lives, their blood, so that they would remain alive. What a spit in the face. But folks, like all, there were many, many Jews and communities that fought and said, no way, we're going to fight you till the end. Amazing. Jews, we're talking about, there was the destruction, the Holocaust of the Jews of Ukraine, of this area, was the largest Holocaust since the days of the rebellion of Bar Kokhba and the destruction of the Second Temple. You know how many years passed by? We're talking about 1700 years passed. Jews don't know how to fight. Jews damn know how to fight. If you look at the secrets of the Torah, the Jews were the greatest of the warriors. And when the Jews back is to the wall, amazing, tremendous amount of sacrifice. Let's read about these communities. Remember the names. Never forget them. Jews that stood up. Jews that lifted up their fist. Way before the JDL. th of Sivan, the first community to go in 1648 was the community, the holy community of Nemrav. The community of Nemrav were all tremendously wealthy people. They had silver and gold, abundance. And then, on the 20th day of Sivan, Bogdan Khmelnytsky sends a letter to the head of the city of Namrov. Please join me in my battle against the Jews. And the head of the city, the mayor of the city, agrees. The Jewish people were very, very weak. Even so, they fortified themselves into a fortress in the city. There were people approaching the fortress, but the Jews were not sure if they were Poles that were coming to save them, or they were Ukrainians coming to kill them. And then they looked at the flag of the army, and with a smile on their face, thank God, it's the Polish army. However, they were deceived, they were tricked. The Cossacks, the Ukrainians, they had lifted up on purpose the Polish army flag. Thousands of Jews were killed, with their neighbors assisting. Their neighbors assisting the Ukrainians. All those years, hundreds of years, neighbors good neighbors. They took, in Nemarov, the Gentiles, they took the boxes of tefillin, philanthropies, and they threw them.
Phylacteries.
Thank you, that's one hell of a word. And they took the scrolls of Torah, and they took Jewish books, and they made them all into bridges in the city. Some of the books and some of the scrolls were burnt. Jews jumped in the water to kill themselves, rather to be at the hands of the Gentiles. In the city of Labuv, the Jews of Labuv got whatever weapons they could find. They got axes, they got pitchforks, they found some metal, they made them into swords. And they stood their ground on the walls of the city. And they defeated the enemies. Remember the city, Labuv. This happened in other places. In a place called Peshmil, in a place called Kamenetz, in a place called Buchach, in a place called Chelm, famous. Jews took whatever weapons they had, and they didn't run, and they fought. And in many, many times, they were successful in defeating the enemy. Amazing. A people that had not fought for 1700 years. Since the time of the rebellion of Bar Kokhba. The lions of Judah woke up to defeat many times the enemies of the Jewish people. Goes on. They fought back. In a place called Nover, there were 600 Polish soldiers that came together with 2,000 Jews in the city. And they made a treaty amongst themselves to fight to the finish against the Cossacks, against the Ukrainians. And they made an oath. And they stood on the walls of the city. And time again they defeated the Ukrainians, the Cossacks. It was a miracle, as in the times of the Torah, the Bible. The Jews saw these miracles, standing up, fighting against these armies. However, in the end, the 600 Polish soldiers who had made a covenant, an oath, turned against the Jews of Tulchin. And they were given the choice, either convert to Christianity or die. And with the words Shema Yisrael on their lips, they marched to their death with heads up high. They were successful over and over again in fighting against the Cossacks, the Ukrainians, and anybody else, and then just to be turned in. turned over by their so-called friends. We hear this over and over again during this period of 3 years. And remember all these heroic Jews. Listen to this story. There was a young, beautiful girl. She was from a famous rabbinical family. She was captured by the Cossacks and married. She was forced to marry this Cossack soldier. She said to him, listen, I know that you're a soldier and I have a tremendous secret, that if you do this secret, you will always be protected in battle. Wow, what's the secret here? Sounds great. So the Jewish girl says, listen, this might sound bizarre, but I'm telling you, it works. You take your rifle and aim it at me and shoot at me. And you'll see that no damage will come to me, no harm will come to me. And this will be for you your sign that you'll never be injured or hurt in battle. What's the craziest thing I've ever heard of? Trust me, this is amongst the Jewish people, this is a kept secret for generations. And he pulled out whatever he had, whatever weapon he used, and she was immediately killed. It was all a trick, so that she wouldn't be forced to live with this non-Jew. Another Jewish girl, a bride and groom. They were being taken into captivity, and they both decided that they were going to commit suicide. They jumped out of the boat in unison, holding arms, where they found their death. As we read on Sabbath morning in our prayers, asking God to avenge all the Jewish blood throughout history, people that were so close, friends or husband and wife, in life and death did not part. This couple, hand in hand, in life, hand in hand, in death, jumping into the waters, dying, suicide. And another girl, a young girl, who was forced to marry a Cossack. But she said only one condition, that we get married in the church across the river. As she was crossing the river in a boat, she jumped in, killing herself. Listen to these Jewish communities. Write them down somewhere. June 23rd, 2019, this year. 20th of Sivan. Take some hours out of your day. Take some food out of your mouth. Remember these heroes. This fast is listed in the Code of Jewish Law. We said in the year 1174 in Blois, France, the grandson of Rashi enacted this as a national fast day. It was forgotten years later. But then it came back. And now today it's forgotten. Go into a yeshiva. Open the door of a study hall and go down and say, listen, the 20th of Sivan, baby. What is that date? Duh. No idea. Total ignorance. People that gave their lives, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people, rather than convert to Christianity. Remember these cities that Jews are no longer there, were destroyed. Namirov, Labuv, Pash Mishalani, Kamenetz, Podolsky, Chelm, Botach, Tulchin. Remember these communities. This year, June 23rd, 2019, be prepared. And remember, the reason why we are here today is only because of our ancestors of yesterday that gave their lives for Torah, for the land of Israel, for the people of Israel, and self-sacrificed. And maybe on this day, when we're fasting and contemplate a little, maybe a dose of self-sacrifice will enter our hearts and souls and make us that much a better Jew.
Amen.